prendre encore quelques minutes pour accueillir tout le monde. Comme je partage mon écran, je ne vois pas l'entièreté des participants et participantes, donc je laisserai mes collègues me donner le go quand on est un nombre suffisant pour commencer. Okay, I see that we are already quite a lot. Should we get starting?
Yes, Sarah, you can go ahead.
Okay. So, my name is Sana and I coordinate achACT, and we are the representative and the coordinator of the Clean Clothes campaign in French-speaking Belgium. And this webinar is co-organized with the Schone Kleren Campagne, who's coordinating the Clean Clothes campaign in the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium. And we're very, very pleased to host you to this third and for now last episode of our webinar series that we entitled Let's Talk Just Fashion. This episode will be dedicated to speaking about greenwashing, social washing, and gender washing, what's going on with sustainability claims in the fashion industry. Before we start, we have a few technical points to look at. We benefit from interpretation team. Thank you for the team who is going to help us going through the interpretation today. So there is English on the main channel, French and Dutch. So please choose the channel that you need to follow the discussion. Je vais également le dire en français. Ce webinaire bénéficie d'interprétation, donc vers l'anglais, le français et le néerlandais. Donc, choisissez bien le canal d'interprétation pour la langue dont vous avez besoin pour suivre les discussions. And I switch back to English. Chaque intervention sera suivie d'un très court moment pour des questions. No, sorry, I switch into English. Each intervention will be followed by a few minutes of Q and R around just clarification question, and we will dedicate quite some time at the end of the webinar to discuss further the topic together. You can also use the chat to put your questions as they come. Please know that the webinar will be recorded. It is already recorded and it will be made available later on our communication channels. So I will soon leave the floor to our colleagues to introduce the session. And please also note that this webinar is possible thanks to funding that we benefit from the EU, who enables our network, the Clean Clothes Campaign, to work on just transition topic more specifically. And the project is Fashioning a Just Transition. Okay, so I leave the floor to Sarah to introduce the session.
Okay, thank you, Sana. Yeah, we're going to discuss a very interesting topic today. Over the past year, there was quite some media coverage on greenwashing already. There have been several studies about greenwashing showing that it is widespread across all sectors. And of course, no surprise, the fashion sector is no exception. A report by the Changing Markets Foundation from a few years ago found that 59% of all green claims by European and UK fashion brands are misleading. But these are all reports about greenwashing. So what about social washing and gender washing? They're also widespread, but we don't really have the figures to support this claim. So we asked HIVA to look into this phenomenon of greenwashing, social washing, and gender washing in the fashion sector. They did two studies for us. In the first study, they looked at green, social, and gender claims made by 4 big fashion companies. And in the second study, they digged into the existing legislation and litigation on this topic. And they looked at some advocacy opportunities for us as CSOs. We have here with us today Anouk Van Obergen from HIVA, who did the research to present the main findings of the two studies. And then our other panelist of today is Emma Vogt from the Kleren Campagne International Office. And she will inspire us with two interesting strategies that CCC and other CSOs are currently testing in the Netherlands in relation to social washing. So like Sana said, if you have questions while the colleagues are presenting, you can post them in the chat. But I will give the floor now to Anouk for the first presentation. Anouk, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I will start by sharing my screen. Okay, hopefully you can now all see my presentation. So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to share our research results here today. So as Sarah already said, we did research on social washing, greenwashing, and gender washing in the fashion industry. I did this together with Herb Heuse, who is also here today to help answer questions as well. So today we will look into our research. We'll start with a short introduction, then talk a bit about the existing legislation when it comes to misleading claims. Then we will share our results of the claims analysis that we did of the 4 major brands. And then we'll end with some recommendations moving forward to different stakeholders on the topic. So for an introduction, very shortly, who is HIVA? So HIVA is the Research Institute for Work and Society. We are a scientific policy-related research institute. We structured around 10 themes, and this research falls a bit into 2 themes, climate and sustainability, but also global development, since the fashion value chains are often very global. So we always carry out research that has a link to policy, is always quite practical, and not purely academic. Then a very short introduction for greenwashing, social washing, and gender washing for the people who are maybe not as familiar with this topic. So greenwashing is the use of vague, exaggerated, or unsubstantiated environmental claims that present products, practices, or business models as more environmentally sustainable than they are in reality. So greenwashing is really the focus on the environmental sustainability, whereas social washing talks about misleading communication, more about labor rights, wages, or working conditions. So more on social sustainability and social responsibility, while there are also still structural problems in supply chains. And then gender washing is specifically linked to gender, as the word says itself. So when companies promote narratives of gender equality or women's empowerment, while their core operations or supply chains continue to reproduce gendered inequalities, exclusion, or violence. So these are the 3 definitions of what we looked at in our research. As Sarah already mentioned, we carried out 2 complementary studies, one that looked at sustainability claims made by brands, and the other one that looked more into the legislation and the litigation. So let's get started on our research on misleading claims. I apologize for the legislation. So the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive is really the core legislation on misleading claims at the moment. So it's an EU directive that was implemented in 2005. The general idea of this directive was to boost consumer confidence, but also to help cross-border trade for small and medium enterprises. It includes harmonized rules for business-to-consumer communication, and in this, it prohibits misleading claims and omissions regardless of their topic. So it's not specifically focused on green claims or social claims, it's just in general on all claims that could be seen as misleading to consumers. In 2019, there was a modernization directive that included stronger enforcement and penalties when misleading claims occurred. So this directive is really the base of the legislation that currently exists on misleading claims. Then there's new legislation on EU level, the Empowering Consumers for the Green Transition Directive. It will be implemented end of September this year, so it's not implemented yet as of now. And it really updates the USCPD and also the Consumer Rights Directive. How it updates this is by including definitions for environmental claims and generic environmental claims. It also expands a blacklist of prohibited practices. For example, a company cannot claim to be climate neutral if it only focuses on offsetting. It also has stricter conditions for future-oriented claims. So if companies make claims about how they will be doing in 2050, for example, there are stricter rules now. And then also social washing is, of course, not allowed, but it's not explicitly tackled in this legislation because it really focuses on green claims more than on social claims. So these are the two main EU-wide frameworks that are the legislation right now. These are all implemented by the member states, and some member states have their own legislation on top of this, or have soft law or guidelines for companies, but it's all really based on these two main directives. So then under these directives, how are sustainability claims evaluated? So the UCPD starts from the perspective of the average consumer. So this means that if a claim is misleading for the average consumer, it is not allowed. So they assume that it's not for people that have expert knowledge or anything like this. The focus is really, is an average person gonna change the way they perceive this product? Is this gonna stop them from buying it if they know if it's true or not true? So that's a bit the idea behind this average consumer perspective. And then the evaluation always happens on a case-by-case basis. There's a blacklist of things you cannot say, but in general, one claim might be very clear for one product, but it could be not sufficient for another product. So this is the reason that it's always a case-by-case, and there's no clear list of what is always allowed and what is never allowed. The focus is also on truthfulness and not on changing business practices. So that means that the remedies often include that claims need to be removed, corrected, or clarified. And the focus is much less on whether the business realities behind it are rectified. The focus is really just on, does the communication reflect what is happening behind the scenes? Then there's some other relevant EU legislation that can be linked to misleading claims. So these are two directives that are relatively new. The Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which requires companies to disclose social and environmental impacts in a very standardized way. And then the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive requires companies to conduct and disclose human rights and environmental due diligence across operations and value chains. Now, these directives don't focus specifically on misleading claims, but it significantly expands publicly available data that can help to assess the credibility of claims that companies are making. So this can really be used as underlying evidence for what companies are claiming in their marketing campaigns or on social media. Then the study that focused on claims by fast fashion brands, we will shortly talk about the results. We won't go into extreme detail, but more on aggregated results. The full reports will be published at the end of the summer. So then the people who are interested can deep dive into the detailed results. But first, what did we analyze? So we selected 4 brands based on their market share in Belgium, but also on how much they are growing in Belgium. So this led to these 4 brands or groups being selected. So first of all, Inditex with the main brand Zara, where we looked at the website and the sustainability report of Inditex, but the social media of Zara. Then H&M Group, Shein, and Uniqlo. Uniqlo is at the moment not the biggest player in Belgium, or one of the biggest players, but it's the biggest grower in Belgium. So that's why this one has also been included in our analysis. We looked at 6 claims per brand, looked at the communication channels via social media, website, and sustainability reports, and then selected claims that are at risk of greenwashing, social washing, gender washing, or multiple types of washing. So the goal here was not to have a representative sample of all claims made by companies, but to already select claims that looked like they could be at risk of greenwashing or social washing, and then to analyze them based on a set of questions. Here we have some examples of claims just to give you an idea of what was selected. So here is one claim per brand from different channels, and then at risk of social washing, gender washing, greenwashing. So we did analyze 24 claims total based on this set of questions, and then these 4 claims we looked at more in depth. We won't get into the in-depth analysis in this presentation, but just for you to know that there's also some more in-depth work done on specifically these claims for these brands. Then this is the set of questions we used to analyze the claims, just also to give you an idea of what kind of questions there were. So is the claim accurate, measurable, and clear for all to understand, for example, was the first claim. Then, for example, question 4 was, does the claim not exaggerate its positive impact or contain anything untrue, also if it's implied and not only explicit? Last question was, does the claim recognize the brand's responsibility? Does it not shift accountability solely on other actors in the value chain? So all 8 of these questions were used to analyze each of the 24 claims that we selected. So the questions on the previous slide are based on the CMA Green Claim Clothes checklist from the UK, and we edited them a little bit to include also the social sustainability aspects. For example, the last question on responsibility was added for the purpose of social washing. And then we counted the number of times we answered no or that it's unclear using this average consumer perspective that the UCPD also uses. Then we calculated the percentage of no answers to categorize the claims in high risk, medium risk, or low risk based on the type of washing it was at risk of. So for example, if a claim was at risk of greenwashing and it had more than 66% no answers, it would be at high risk of greenwashing. This is how we analyzed the 24 claims. And then for the results, this is a table of the brand overview. So as we said, we selected 6 claims per brand and then analyzed each of them for the set of questions. And as you can see, there were 0 claims that we selected that had a low risk. And then a bit depending on the brand, there were different divisions, but the differences between the brands were not very large. So in total, we had 14 claims that were high-risk claims and then 10 claims that were medium-risk claims. Then for the division between types of washing, so we selected more claims on social washing because this was also the main focus on the study. As Sarah said, there has been more and more attention on greenwashing, while social washing is also a very important issue that is talked about less. So the goal was also to really look into this social washing a bit more, which is why 12 of the 24 claims were on social washing. And then 7 were on greenwashing, 2 on gender washing, and 3 had aspects both of social and greenwashing in the claim. And then if we look at the percentage of high-risk claims here, we see that social washing has a much higher percentage of high-risk claims than greenwashing, which is quite an interesting result. And then we have a bit more detailed findings for all the 24 claims together. So for the question 2, 0 claims tell the whole story of a product or relate to one part of the product without misleading people about other parts of the overall impacts. So none of the claims we selected passed the criteria for this question. Same for questions 4 and 5. So all claims exaggerate the positive impact of the brand or contain something untrue. And all claims miss out or hide information that people need to make informed choices. For question 7, actually, none of the claims use a necessary standard feature or a legal requirement as an environmental or social benefit. So what is meant by this question is, for example, if a brand sells water, they can't say it's gluten-free water because that is just a standard feature of water that there's no gluten in it. So that's just for an example to understand this question a bit better. And then for the last question that was on the brand's responsibility, we see that 92% of the social claims selected do not recognize this responsibility. 100% of gender claims do not, and then much lower, 29% of green claims. And then for the mixed claims, it was 67% of the claims that did not recognize the brand's responsibility. So we see that this is really quite an issue. Brands really taking responsibility for the social conditions in their value chain. A lot of the claims put the pressure on suppliers or pushed them to take responsibility for this while ignoring purchasing practices and other aspects that influence it from the brands. Then this was it for our claims, but we also in the other study assessed the policy framework and its implementation. So the legislation I shortly went through. The litigation, I won't go into detail about the cases we analyzed there because Emma will talk more about a litigation case that is occurring right now. But I will share shortly the results of our research just to give you also an overview of this. So our main findings of this research are that the key bottleneck is not legal absence, but the enforcement prioritization. As I said, there are legal frameworks available. There are directives that tackle misleading claims, but in litigation, we see that this is still something that is lacking or not being used to its full potential. There's also at the moment still limited use of CSRD and due diligence data to challenge claims. Of course, this is also very new that this data is becoming available, but it could really be used to leverage misleading claims and show that companies are not being truthful in their marketing campaigns. Then there's also a high fragmentation between consumer law, labor law, and sustainability regulation, while often the misleading claims, especially on social sustainability, are linked to all three of these topics. So our overall conclusion here is that the challenge is not in legal innovation, but more so in closing the gap between formal legal coverage and then actual enforcement. So we don't need to campaign for more legislation or stricter legislation. The legislation is actually already all there, both for environmental claims and for social claims. But we don't see this reflected in the litigation. We don't see many cases, more and more on greenwashing, but really not on social washing, even though the UCPD doesn't make a difference between greenwashing and social washing. So the legislation is actually there for both. So now, what does this mean moving forward? We know that there's enough legislation, but still in our claims analysis, we saw that many are still at risk of greenwashing or social washing or gender washing. So how can this be tackled in the future? Our recommendations are structured based on the stakeholder. So I will shortly go into the recommendations per stakeholder, starting with the policymakers. So here, a key recommendation is really to explicitly include social claims in UCPD and ECGT guidance. Now there is really a focus on these green claims, on environmental impact, while there's also social claims and social impact that is currently just not being mentioned, even though it's implicitly also covered under these directives. Secondly, regulatory links could be developed between CSRD disclosures and consumer-facing claims, so that these really have to align and that there can't be any discrepancy between what is said in a sustainability report and what is said on an advertisement. Third, support harmonized enforcement across member states. So yes, it is, as was said before, always a case-by-case situation, but still harmonized enforcement across member states is important, and it shouldn't be the case that one member state is more strict than another or has more laws than the other. It would really be helpful, especially because we are looking at global brands, that also the rules are very harmonized between companies, between countries for these companies. And then lastly, encourage remedies that go beyond communication adjustments and that contribute to addressing the underlying issues. So this is a bit coming back to what I said before. Currently, the focus is really on the truthfulness of the communication and not on underlying issues or business practices. And this is a recommendation that comes back for almost every stakeholder, actually, to make sure that we also push for, if there's social washing, that we also push for better working conditions in the value chain, and not only that they don't miscommunicate about them. Then for government, so more on the local level, we recommend allocating resources within consumer protection authorities to monitor and investigate sustainability claims. We see that this is already happening more in some countries than in others, so it would be good that there's really specific resources that can help the consumer protection authorities with this task. Secondly, fast fashion should really be a priority sector for enforcement, since it has many known issues in the value chain when it comes to labor rights and working conditions. So it should be one of the first sectors to look at. Third, a focus on social and labor claims should be included, where it's now too much still on green claims. The fourth one is a bit more on the litigation. So currently there are many procedural barriers for civil society organizations to go to court with cases, and this should really be lowered, so it's more easy to come with a case against a big brand when they are using misleading communication. And then also strengthen the cooperation between regulators, labor inspection, and reporting, since this is a topic that crosses all three. And lastly, again, promote the outcome-oriented enforcement in social washing cases and not only look at communication. Then for civil society organizations, currently, there is a focus on documenting, and it should really move to using this evidence in complaints, in litigation, and in regulatory action. But again, I think Emma will go more into detail about what is happening already on this right now. Then leverage new transparency tools, such as the CSRD disclosures, again, to identify inconsistencies and build a strong case against brands. Prioritize high-impact cases that really clarify the interpretation of social claims and social washing, to really make an example of this is not allowed, this is not okay, and communication should be different, but also business practices should be different. Then also frame social washing as both a labor rights issue and a consumer protection issue. It's not one or the other, it's really both. Consumers are being misled about where the clothes they buy are being made or under what conditions they are being made. And people making the clothes are also going through horrible circumstances. So it's really an issue of both sides and not one or the other. Then combine legal and public advocacy through targeted communication strategies. So when making a legal case, obviously the language is a bit different than when you want to share what you're doing with the public. So make sure that targeted communication strategies exist based on who you're communicating with. And then our last one, link misleading claims to material conditions in supply chains and really push for remedies that address outcomes, not just communication. So again, this same recommendation that we make for all stakeholder groups. And then lastly, for the brands. So the first one sounds quite obvious, I think, align claims with verifiable outcomes. and then also move beyond process-based communication and focus on outcomes as evidence of impact. A lot of claims right now talk about what systems there are in place or how working conditions are being shaped without actually saying these are the working conditions or these are the results of what we are doing. So the focus should really be more on also, okay, the brand is doing this, now what does it lead to, and not only what are they doing. And then, very importantly, acknowledge responsibility within supply chains, including the role of purchasing practices and prices in shaping outcomes. The responsibility can't be pushed down the value chain without brands taking any responsibility of their own on how they shape these suppliers. And then lastly, strengthen transparency and accountability by providing supplier information and also progress on key indicators. So the more people know, the more transparency there is, also the better for everyone involved. So these are our key recommendations for brands. And then we went through all of our recommendations. So this is, in a nutshell, what we did for the past few months and what came out of our studies. So thank you very much for your attention. And if there's any questions, feel free to ask them. And also feel free to reach out to us afterwards if you still have any questions or want to discuss anything. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Anouk, for this insightful elements that you digged in during the study. I only see one clarification question and lots of discussion questions to be kept for later. So the clarification question for you is, what is the difference between ECGT and the suspended Green Claim Directive?
The Green Claims Directive was actually even more strict than the ECGT. So this directive even had in there somewhere that claims had to be approved before being used, for example, while now that's not the case anymore. It's only when claims are being made that you can go against them and say that it's not okay or that it is okay. The Green Claims Directive really went a few steps further than the ECGT and had an even longer list of what is allowed, what is not allowed. So this is not necessarily a watered down version of the Green Claims Directive, but it's a bit less strict and a bit more case by case instead of really this huge blacklist of what is allowed, what is not allowed.
Thanks a lot. Okay, I think we will now leave the floor to Emma Vogt from the Clean Clothes Campaign and the Schone Kleren Campagne in the Netherlands to pursue presenting the elements on the initiative with the consumer authority in the Netherlands and then on the Levi's court case. I let you share your screen. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Sanna. Thanks to the organizers for inviting me to present today. And yeah, it was also really interesting to hear what HIVA has done in their research. And I think a few of the points I'm making here are also nicely connecting to some of the points that Anouk made just now. So I will talk about two ways that we've been challenging social washing using avenues we have available in the Netherlands. First of all, through the Authority for Consumers and Markets, the ACM, and through consumer law with our litigation against Levi's. And I am working for the International Office and the Dutch Clean Clothes Campaign as an urgent appeals coordinator. Urgent appeals are what we call the requests that are coming to the Clean Clothes Campaign network from workers and their representatives, such as trade unions and NGOs, to help to mobilize solidarity and action to address specific violations that they encountered in the factories. And our court case against Levi's also started out as an urgent appeal, but I will tell you more about that later. So first of all, I will talk about our work addressing the authority for consumers and markets, about social washing and the use of social auditing in that. The reason that we started this project was out of an interest actually to challenge the use of social auditors as a way for brands to legitimize, to quote unquote substantiate claims they're making about labor conditions in their supply chains. Here are some reports of, I would say, a big body of work throughout the years, outlining all the different problems that there are with the social auditing industry. Yeah, so there's a report that we made with our network. There's a report about audit deception by Transparentum, a report by SOMO, and at the bottom, a story published by Human Rights Watch. We could dedicate a whole webinar to that topic, which I know we are not doing. But yeah, just to very briefly summarize, we think there's a big issue with brands making use of social auditing, making use of certification schemes as a way to present a reality of what's happening supposedly inside their factories, while we know that there's a lot of issues with the way that inspections for audits are being conducted. There's all kinds of incentives for auditors to look the other way when they see serious issues, because they are usually contracted by the factory that they are supposed to inspect. And another big issue is that reports coming out of these audits are not publicly accessible and not accessible to the workers about which the reports are being made. So they don't actually know if what the auditor is reporting about their workplace is accurate, and they cannot therefore also challenge it. Neither can we as a CCC network. Yeah, and I think that also links back actually to the responsibility issue that Anouk mentioned. So brands sort of being able to then say, well, the auditor said this, and sort of externalizing the responsibility to be aware of what's happening at their workplace. So out of this this observation or this frustration with the industry, we have an ongoing collaboration with SOMO. SOMO is the Center for Research on Multinational Corporations, another member of our network, to look at ways to challenge this. And for this specific project about social washing claims, we also teamed up with the Consumentenbond, which is the Dutch consumer union representing the interests of consumers in the Netherlands. And so we prepared an analysis of social claims that brands are communicating towards consumers, where they also link to social auditors and certifications and give the impression that these are solid evidence of the claims that they're making. And we prepared this for the Dutch Authority for Consumers and Markets, or ACM. So the ACM is authorized in the Netherlands to check if companies are behaving in a legitimate way in many different aspects, but also when it comes to their sustainability and social claims. So Anouk described the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive, a European directive. In the Netherlands, that's translated to the Wet oneerlijke handelspraktijken. So that's our Dutch legislation on that. And then the ACM has also developed further guidelines, the Leidraad, which then gives further guidelines to companies on exactly what you should be aware of in the kinds of sustainability claims that you make in accordance with this Unfair Commercial Practices Directive. And the ACM has previously looked into greenwashing claims by brands, with most notably the outcome I've shown here in the screenshot on the left, an investigation into H&M and Decathlon about their sustainability labeling, which led to them removing certain labels from products, and which also led them to agree to pay significant sums to charities. So H&M paid 500,000 euros and Decathlon 400,000 euros to charities of their choice, which I would not say is the ideal outcome, and certainly not also a remedy. What Anouk also pointed out is sort of lacking in this system still, but it does show that the ACM has this leverage, this authority to really change companies' behavior. So we wanted to raise this issue with them about social washing, about claims being made by garment brands, about the labor conditions, and then also about the way that social auditors and certification schemes are being instrumentalized in that communication. So here I've included a few examples that we ultimately reported on as part of our report to the ACM. So on the top left is a screenshot from the website of We Fashion, a Dutch garment brand, saying all factories are being inspected. They say they find the conditions of their workers very important. And then it sort of implies that for that reason, because that's so important, factories have to be able to provide a valid audit report. So they are sort of very clearly, explicitly making the link between we care about labor conditions and factories need to have a valid audit report. Sort of, yeah, that seems to be the way to address the concern, which we think is, well, not actually true. Then on the top right, there's a screenshot from Nike citing a statistic that's also based on social auditing results about the number or the percentage of factories having now developed safe and healthy workplaces. So that's one of the indicators that would be part of an audit done in these factories. And then at the bottom is a screenshot from Puma, actually on a product page, so really directly linked to the page that a consumer is browsing when they buy a product. And that's referring to a certification initiative for sustainable leather linked to the leather working group. So these are some of our most explicit examples that we found where brands are communicating to consumers about labor conditions and also substantiating that and referring to auditors and certification schemes. And so giving the impression that that this is a valid source to substantiate those claims. All in all, we looked at quite a large number of brands selling on the Dutch market. So we conducted our analysis in a few steps. We first had a long list of about 80 brands selling on the Dutch market. And then we checked, first of all, what are they claiming towards consumers, which could be also then categorized into sort of the very obvious claims that any consumer would come across and the more hidden claims that you would find if you look into a corporate social responsibility report. Then we checked if they are making certain claims about labor conditions, is there also a link to social auditors? Because that's what we wanted to sort of flag to the ACM. And we've also looked then into whether there are known cases of violations in the supply chains of these brands that would actually contradict the claims that they have made publicly. And for that, we've also looked at our own information about urgent appeals that our network has worked on in the past. Yeah, and I wanted to also mention that the reason we wanted to flag this with the ACM is also because they are looking at the whole sector, and they're setting standards for the whole sector. And we see this also as a phenomenon that is very widely spread. So we did end up highlighting a few case studies because we then did quite some analysis and documented various sources about violations as well, which we were not able to do for a huge number of brands. But it's important, I think, to emphasize that we're flagging this as a sector-wide issue and not sort of only saying it's now, we fashion Nike and Puma doing it wrong and that's where the problem is. I think it's a much wider problem, and these are just very clear examples of what that looks like in practice. So yeah, I talked about linking it to specific violations, and that resulted in these 4 case studies that we then presented. The table is in Dutch. I will not present everything in the table, but to give you an idea, I'll look at the one from Nike. So we've already said before that they've made the claim that 87% of the suppliers have created healthy and safe workplaces. And they also then said that they used audits to check that human rights are being respected. We contrasted with findings both from the NGO Transparentum, which has found indications of forced labor at a supplier in Taiwan supplying to Levi's, and also research from our partner organization, Worker Rights Consortium, found a case of workers in Thailand being forced to take voluntary unpaid leave, but it's not really voluntary if you're being forced to do that. And that led to 3,300 workers being owed $600,000 in compensation that they should have gotten if they didn't, quote unquote, voluntarily resign. So that's an example where, yeah, I think this makes it very clear that the claims are not correct. At the same time, and we've also discussed this with the Consumers Union, with SOMO, and then also with the ACM when we presented this research to them, from our perspective, we should not need to actually provide this information about violations to already flag the issue that brands are making certain claims, are often being very absolute about, well, everything is okay, we always do the right thing, then it's actually the burden of proof should be on their side to give us insight into what those claims are based on, rather than us having to disprove that that's the case, because often it's actually very difficult for us to have all the relevant information. And at the same time, brands have a lot more access to information, including to audit reports that we've never been given access to. So that's also one of the recommendations that we've made, or the requests that we've put towards the ACM, to actually demand from brands as a first step that they provide more transparency into the results of audits, so that, yeah, they actually substantiate their claims. And that would really allow us much better to then, yeah, check what's actually going on with certain claims coming out of those audits, that we can present also to the workers whose workplace has been audited. So we've presented this to the ACM, submitted it in February of this year, and they've said that they're willing to look into this and they will conduct their own research into the issue of social washing, because they were, at least for garments, previously more focused on sustainability claims and greenwashing. And then in May, they've announced that social claims in the garment sector would be a key research area for them as part of their sustainability work. So we were really encouraged to hear that. It's an acknowledgement that this is a relevant topic. And we're hopeful that some of our recommendations will be followed up. So that includes demanding more transparency from brands, but also to maybe develop further specific guidelines about the issue of social washing, and also the use of reference to certification schemes and auditors, which, yeah, if there are better guidelines and if the sector is better informed about what they should be doing, then ultimately enforcement could also be done later. So that's our hope, of course, that this has actual consequences for the way that companies are acting. So I'll leave it there on that part, and then move to our court case against Levi's, and this centers around misleading claims about working conditions as well. Good to distinguish the two also, because yeah, it's kind of a similar issue in its basis, but it's concerning a specific brand, and it's also in response to an urgent appeal in our network. And so the reason that here we went to the court is that, yeah, we are actually looking at one particular brand, and we're not flagging a sector-wide issue like we were with the ACM report. And also in a court case, we have more opportunity to define our own demands, and so really steer a bit more what we want as an outcome of this court case. Because, yeah, for this case, it would not be sufficient that Levi's would, for example, make a donation to some charity if they agree on that with the ACM. We actually have very clear ideas of what should happen, and that includes remedy for workers. So that's why we went down this route as well. And this is another project that we've prepared in collaboration with SOMO, and also in the early stages with a legal clinic at the University of Amsterdam, where students were exploring actually what existing legislation is available and how it could be better used for organizations like ourselves. So going into the content, this is coming out of an urgent appeal about working conditions and about the crackdown of trade union members at a supplier to Levi's based in Turkey. The factory is called achACT Textile, and they are still exclusively producing for Levi's. So Levi's has a lot of influence on what's happening in the factory. At this factory, at the end of 2023, workers were very dissatisfied with several things in the factory. They had to work very long hours. It was hardly allowed to take leave. The quality of the food in the canteen was bad, and they were just generally not treated very well. And for this reason, many of them joined a new independent trade union, Peertexen, which had said that maybe they can raise these issues as a collective and bring about some changes on the factory floor. Immediately, the factory management was very hostile to every worker joining the union. Workers were put under pressure to actually leave the union again. Threats were made to them about, for example, physical consequences or consequences about rumors being spread about them to their family, which in this region of Turkey is quite a risky possibility for some of the women working there. And yeah, there was immediately a lot of hostility against people joining this trade union, Beertexen. The next thing that happened was that one of the worker leaders representing the workers for the trade union was fired. And in solidarity with her, a lot of workers decided to walk out, to go on a strike, and start protesting peacefully in front of the factory. This, again, a peaceful protest in solidarity with one of their colleagues, and to say that the factory should listen to their demands, was also met with a lot of hostility in the form of the riot police coming to beat them down, to attack them with pepper spray, to arrest them. Yeah, this was a very hostile, violent response to peaceful protest. And when the protests were finished, the factory fired 400 workers who participated in the protest. So, yeah, these are just all very gross violations of human rights and labor rights. And of course, this was reported to the network by the Clean Clothes campaign in Turkey, so they were monitoring this case. They contacted Levi's, we contacted Levi's, the trade union contacted Levi's. And initially, they also acknowledged themselves that this is a violation of their zero tolerance policy, because, yeah, they have a lot of words in their policies about respecting freedom of association rights. However, when it came to proposing actual remedies to help the 400 workers that were fired, when it came to concrete proposals to have meetings with the trade union and the workers, Levi's never followed up and just sort of let things continue. Meanwhile, the factory hired new workers to replace the ones they fired. And the people that were affected by this case are still to this day demanding a compensation that's applicable in Turkey when you were fired for trade union activities. And Levi's continues to source from this factory without doing something about addressing the demands of these workers. This is all also documented in a lot of detail by the Worker Rights Consortium, who made an independent investigation, interviewed a lot of people locally. So, yeah, Levi certainly cannot say they were not aware of this. And on the right, you see a screenshot also from CNN reporting that happened in June 2024. Yeah, actually 2 years ago now. This is all in great contrast with what Levi's is saying is happening in their factories. And this is just a small selection. So as part of the court case, we collected a lot of Levi's claims, mostly from their website. But also on the top right here, you see a label that they were adding to their products for, I think, several years, saying original style, responsibly made. They say that they've always stood up for what's right, with a picture of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Like I said, they have specific commitments written about freedom of association, respecting workers' rights to form and join organizations of their choice and bargain collectively. And yeah, here's another one saying they're strongly committed to workers' rights. So this is all together creating an image of responsibility and about, yeah, standing up for the right thing. And consumers believe in this. And yeah, we wanted to actually use that as an entry point to challenge what happened in Turkey and move Levi's into action. So we've launched a consumer court case with us as an organization representing the average consumer, but we're also joined by 4 individual consumers who have purchased Levi's in the relevant time period and who have submitted their own statements about why they feel specifically misled by the brand. Here's 3 of them appearing in campaign materials that we've developed. And so what we're doing with the court case is to argue that Levi's has misled consumers by making all these very absolute claims about working conditions and about doing the right thing, while the case from Turkey, but also, there are other known violations in their supply chain. They show that actually these claims are wrong. And then comes the question of remedy, because indeed the most obvious follow-up from a legal perspective to misleading consumers and misleading claims would be, well, the company has to publish a rectification, change something in their communication. But we wanted to really find a way to go beyond that. And the fact that we have individual consumers part of the court case allows us to go a bit further, because these consumers can claim compensation for the particular purchases that they've made. Because for us as a foundation, we're talking about sort of the abstract average consumer, but these are specific people who have made purchases and have the receipts, so to speak. And the way that they framed their demand is to ask for compensation in kind. So they're saying, I'm not satisfied with just receiving my, well, let's say 150 euros back from Levi's. I want a different kind of compensation. We believe they're entitled to compensation. And instead of financial compensation for the jeans, they're asking for compensation in kind, because these consumers also want Levi's to actually follow their promises. They will not be reassured if the claims just disappear, but the reality doesn't change for the workers. So what they're asking in terms of the compensation in kind is that Levi's actually rectifies the situation for the workers in Turkey. And that is quite I think we're pushing the boundaries a little bit in terms of the interpretation of compensation in kind, but we'll see how a judge looks at that. And I think, both within the court case, but also in response to the announcement of the court case, we do see from the general public that they agree with these consumers that the way for the brands to really solve this is by doing the right thing now and by still making those words ring true after all, and not by removing the words. You might be curious, of course, about Levi's response so far. So when we first announced to them that we were planning to sue them, the response has been actually for them to remove a bunch of things from the website. For example, the claim "we've always stood up for what's right" is now no longer appearing on the website. And they have informed us that they had removed some outdated information. So thus far, they're focusing on changing the words and not telling us anything about plans to change the reality on the ground for the workers. But hopefully that will change as the court case progresses and also as pressure on the brand ramps up, because we're also planning to pair this with more public actions that the general public can also show their support for the demands and increase pressure on Levi's to take action. So stay tuned for that. And I think that our Belgian network members are also happy to join those actions as they will happen. So that's really exciting. And then finally, about the next steps in the court case, we expect a first hearing just about the admissibility after the summer. And then actually the contents of the case will be discussed in court probably early next year. So of course we want to keep up the pressure on Levi's in the meantime, and that's why campaigning alongside it is also going to be important. I'll leave it there. Thanks so much for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Emma, for all this information. I see that we are quite late already in our webinar session, so I will quickly switch into the questions. Though, Emma, as you said, the Belgians will stay tuned to support at best the OZAC case and the Levi's court case from our campaigning efforts. So stay tuned indeed. So if I look into the questions that were shared in the chat, we have quite some and we have a limited time left. So the first question is, how strict do you consider Belgian legislation in comparison to other EU member states? And this one is for Anouk.
Yes, I can keep it short. I think in Belgium, it's a bit less strict than in other EU member states. I think our neighboring countries, and even the UK, who's not an EU member anymore, but still has the same legislation, have a bit more additional legislation or soft law. A lot of countries have guidelines, which Belgium doesn't have. And the watchdog in Belgium is the Vogt economy. So yeah, I don't know what it is in French, but
SPF, yeah.
yeah, they also have more limited funds than in other countries to really look into this. So I would say in Belgium, it's a bit less strict than in other EU member states, especially our neighboring countries that also sometimes have additional legislation, while Belgium only uses the existing EU directives.
So there is room for more advocacy there as well. Thank you, Anouk. Another question, will the enforcement of EGGT in September have any impacts? That's also for you.
I think on social claims, the impact would be limited since it really focuses more on green claims. And it's hard to say what the impact would be. I've heard different stories about it. There's also some people that are scared that rules are becoming too strict, so we will have green hushing, where companies don't want to communicate about sustainability at all anymore because they don't want to say anything wrong and be fined for saying anything wrong, so prefer saying nothing. But it's a bit difficult to guess how things will evolve. I think in any case, for social claims, the impact will be relatively limited.
Thanks a lot. I'm going ahead with the questions. So, should there also be a recommendation that regulatory links should be developed between CSDDD disclosure and consumer-facing claims?
I think yes. I think the more we can link the consumer-facing claims to other information that we have about the companies, the better, because then it becomes easier and easier to assess what they are claiming towards consumers, whether it's substantiated or not.
Thank you. Then this one can be asked to both of you, I think. Fast fashion being one of the first, what about luxury brands who lack transparency the most? Who lacks transparency the most?
Yeah, I also thought about this question. I think what makes it maybe difficult in this particular context is that luxury brands also don't really say that much about the working conditions. So if you want to take that as an entry point to hold brands accountable, which we did in the cases I presented, that's quite difficult, right? If a brand is just completely silent and sort of presenting their shiny products without any reference to working conditions, then yeah, how to use these kinds of legislations, I think that's very difficult. It also reminds me of the observation that some brands are quite are making quite visible that, for example, they signed up to the Bangladesh Accord or now the International Safety Accord. and some others don't mention it at all. And I think that also relates a bit to not wanting to remind people even of the fact that this is an issue in factories, that sometimes a building could collapse or a fire might happen. And then, the question is how much do brands estimate that their consumers are even thinking about this or care about this? And maybe this type of consumer actually does not want to be reminded of this, and so it doesn't show up in their communications.
Yeah, it will also have to be transparent. It will reveal that they actually produce in Pakistan and Bangladesh, which people might even not consider. Okay. Anouk, did you want to add something on this one?
No, I think it makes perfect sense what Emma said. And maybe to add just a small thing, there are also not litigation cases, but the Italian watchdog has also cases against Dior and Armani. So they are being looked at as well. But it's true that it's a bit harder to get them with this legislation if they just communicate about it less and say less about it.
Yeah, indeed. Then there was a question, can you tell something about how this links to the French law that was just adopted? I also see that Salma, our colleague from ActionNet France, is attending the webinar. So maybe Anouk, you can respond to whether you looked into it or not, and to what extent, and Salma can add if she agrees.
I haven't looked into it in detail yet. I do know that there is also an EU-wide investigation now against Shein and Temu to see if their products can be considered as addictive, to then also possibly ban their ads. But this specific French law that was just adopted, I don't know the specifics about it.
Yeah, so maybe I can add a word or two about that. Thank you, Sana. The law has very important limitations, probably more limitations than not. The biggest ones are probably the fact that it is completely blind to labor abuses and human rights issues. And the second one is that it is very, very narrow, and it introduces cumulative criteria, which makes it probably only a threat to Shein and Temu, as you said, Anouk. I am speaking in the future because most of the law will be published later around the fall through decrees made by the government. And in regards to the advertising, as for the question, to be positive, the good part of the law is that it does recognize that advertising is not neutral and that it is a part of the business model. Although it does not recognize that responsibility claims, sustainability claims are also very strong components of the marketing models. And yet, because the law is so narrow and because it focuses on Shein, Temu, AliExpress, and platforms, similar platforms, it does create a situation in which the French and European brands are off the hook. And in that sense, it does not tackle the broader issue of misleading social claims or sustainability claims. And we can also say that in that way, the law is also a new marketing tool for the other brands, for the French and European brands. So not sure that the law will be a good response to misleading claims of responsibility and sustainability. And I'll give back the mic to Sana.
Thanks a lot, Salma. I see that we are at 1, so we are gonna go beyond the time announced for the people amongst us who are okay to stay connected for a few minutes, because there was one last question that I see Emma start to reply in the chat. So maybe I'll read quickly the question and let you very briefly say what you responded. So when we want to report violations, the brands ask for detailed information that we can't provide. They want to see proofs. Do you have any advice on how to handle this? And this is part of a big chunk of work that is achieved in the urgent appeal system of the Clean Clothes campaign. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think, like I said, we're sort of balancing on two points of view here because on the one hand, we do want to be careful about bringing certain allegations to brands, and we do, for urgent appeals, significant amount of documentation. We go to different checks to see if we can combine different sources of information before saying, well, look, clearly this is happening in the factory, and also clearly this brand is a buyer in the factory. So we do that because we do want to also keep our trustworthiness, our credibility as a network in communications with the brands. At the same time, as I also said, I do think many of us also want to reverse that burden of proof and to also expect from brands to give us then more information if they say, well, we don't know that this is happening or we think this is not happening. Well, then show us what specifically you have done in the factory to make it safer, to address delays in wage payments, to ensure the factory could pay severance, which are sort of very specific things that you could share information about, which I think we could be a bit more strong about sometimes, because brands do have a lot of information and access to the factory in a way that it's much harder for us to obtain that information as a, yeah, let's say outsider, more or less, while they have the economic leverage to actually demand certain information from the factory. And yeah, should also share it with an important stakeholder like workers and their representatives, as we are.
Thanks a lot, Emma, and thanks a lot to all of you who've been asking all these questions. Before we close the webinar, we wanted to remind you that we have a manifesto on just transition and that it's available for individual signatures, but also for organizations to sign on. We will share with you the recorded webinar and more material to dig into the topic further. And we have an evaluation form that we would like you to fill in. If you can take the time, I think the link was shared in the chat. Okay. Thanks a lot. And while you all respond to the questionnaire and the evaluation form, I will thank again Anouk and Emma for their intervention. Thanks also for WSM who made this research possible from HIVA, and the research will soon be available at the end of the summer, as it was announced. And thanks a lot to our interpretation team who's been with us all along to make the webinar accessible to all of you. I think, if I don't forget anything, that we can say bye and see each other soon, hopefully.
Maybe we can wait that the people fill in the form for the evaluation, and then we can go have a lunch. Thank you.